In just a few days, the front around Lyman, Donetsk, Luhansk, and Pokrovsk has revealed something far more dangerous than another round of battlefield losses. This is no longer a war where only troops and armor are being hunted. What is now under attack is the entire structure that keeps Russian forces moving, fighting, and surviving. Men hiding under thermal cloaks are still being found. Air defense systems built to protect the sky are being struck from above. Fuel sites, supply vehicles, shelters, and communications links are all falling into the same kill chain. That is why these images matter. They do not just show destruction. They show a battlefield where drones are starting to strip away concealment, break movement, and weaken coordination at the same time. The deeper meaning is even more serious. Ukraine is not simply using UAVs to hit targets of opportunity. It is using them to pressure the battlefield layer by layer until the line between the front and the rear begins to collapse. And when that begins, the real damage is not counted only in burning wrecks, but in how fast an army starts losing the ability to react. Stay with military force because the real story is how drone warfare is turning the sky into a weapon that can slowly tear an entire combat system apart. In the Lyman direction, Russian troops have tried to adjust to constant drone pressure by using anti-thermal cloaks. But that fix does not solve the real problem. These cloaks can weaken part of the heat signature, yet they do not erase the outline of a human body, the rhythm of movement, or the contrast between a man and the ground around him. That matters because modern drone warfare does not depend on one sensor alone. A pilot can track heat, shape, motion, and position at the same time, then compare what appears on the screen with the terrain below. So even when a soldier believes he has blended into the field, the pattern still gives him away. What once looked like smart concealment now works more like a delay, and on a front where seconds matter, a delay is often not enough to stay alive. That is why the real issue at Lyman is not just whether Russian troops can hide better, but whether older habits of survival still make sense under permanent observation from above. Once that first layer of concealment starts to fail, pressure quickly moves upward to the systems that are supposed to defend the wider battlefield. That shift can be seen in the reported strikes on 2 Tor air defense systems in the Donetsk area over 2 consecutive days. This is not a minor detail, because the Tor is a short-range air defense system built to shield forces from threats coming out of the sky, including drones and missiles. When a weapon designed for protection becomes the target, the message is bigger than the loss of one vehicle. It suggests that Ukrainian UAV crews are not only surviving inside contested airspace, but also locating and reaching the very nodes meant to push them back. That gives the event both tactical and symbolic value. Tactically, a destroyed Tor reduces local protection for nearby units. Symbolically, it shows that the contest in the air is becoming more aggressive and more precise than many older defensive layouts were built to handle. And once a defensive system begins to look vulnerable, every sector behind it starts to feel less secure. What makes these strikes even more serious is the discipline of the kill chain behind them. After each attack, a reconnaissance drone reportedly rose again to confirm the level of damage. That step matters because modern drone operations are not just about hitting a target and moving on. They depend on a full cycle of detection, strike, verification, and recorded assessment. Without confirmation, commanders do not know whether the target is disabled, repairable, or still dangerous. With confirmation, the strike becomes operationally useful, not just visually impressive. This shows a methodical approach where UAV crews are working as part of a structured system rather than acting on impulse. In battlefield terms, that kind of accountability turns drone warfare into a repeatable process, and repeatable processes are what slowly break an army's ability to recover. That is why the loss of 2 Tor systems in 2 days should be read as more than expensive battlefield damage. Each system covers part of a wider sector, so when two are removed in quick succession, gaps can begin to open across the local air defense picture. Those gaps do not need to be huge to matter. They only need to be wide enough for more reconnaissance flights, more strike drones, and more pressure against targets farther behind the line. In that sense, the story here is not only about what was destroyed, but about what becomes exposed after the destruction. And once exposure begins to spread from air defense to the rear, the next targets are no longer hard to predict. The strike on the fuel depot in Luhansk shows that Ukrainian UAV operations are moving far beyond chasing soldiers in the open, because they are now hitting the assets that keep the whole battlefield alive. Fuel is not just another supply item in war. It is what keeps tanks moving, trucks running, artillery supplied, and rotations possible. When a fuel site is hit, the damage spreads well beyond the blast itself, because one fire at the rear can slow movement across a much wider area. That is why this kind of target matters so much. A burning depot is not only a loss of stored fuel, but a warning that the support structure behind the line is no longer safe. And once the rear begins to feel exposed, every combat unit depending on that rear starts carrying the risk forward with it. What makes that strike more important is the way it was handled after the impact. According to the source, a reconnaissance drone went back up to confirm the result, which shows that this was not a random hit followed by guesswork. It followed the same disciplined pattern already seen in other Ukrainian drone actions. The target is found, the strike is launched, and the result is checked from above. That tells us something serious about how these missions are being run. Infrastructure is being treated with the same level of control as armored vehicles or infantry positions. In military terms, that means the goal is not only to create a dramatic explosion, but to make sure the damage is real, measured, and useful for the next decision. And when even fuel facilities are folded into that same kill chain, the scope of drone warfare starts to look much larger than a simple frontline tool. At the same time, another target reveals how quickly this war is changing in technical terms. A Russian ground robot carrying an anti-tank weapon was struck by a Ukrainian FPV drone and destroyed, which is a sharp example of unmanned systems colliding with each other on the same battlefield. That point matters because ground robots are supposed to reduce risk for crews and push weapons closer to dangerous areas without exposing soldiers directly. On paper, that sounds like a smart answer to a battlefield filled with surveillance and precision fire. But in practice, a machine moving on the ground still has serious limits. It is often slower than a human under pressure, easier to track across open ground, and far less able to react when danger comes from above. Once an FPV drone finds it, the robot can become a target with very little room to escape. That turns a tool of battlefield adaptation into proof that adaptation alone does not guarantee survival. The deeper meaning is hard to miss. When Ukrainian UAVs can hit both a fuel depot in the rear and a combat robot closer to the line, they are no longer attacking one category of target at a time. They are reaching into several layers of the Russian war effort at once. One strike pressures sustainment. Another hits a new battlefield platform before it can shape the fight. Together, those actions suggest a broader method, where drones are being used to wear down both the endurance of Russian operations and the systems meant to modernize them. And once that pressure moves from rear support to moving assets near the front, even smaller targets scattered across the battlefield begin to look much more vulnerable. After strikes on air defense and rear support, Ukrainian UAVs kept pushing into a different layer of the battlefield. And that layer is made up of scattered targets that once looked too small or too hidden to matter. This is what makes the footage so important. The drones are not waiting for a large assault group or a column of heavy vehicles. They are finding men crossing open ground, civilian-type vehicles used for transport, armored platforms fitted with anti-drone frames, and hiding places inside hangars or basements. That means the battlefield is being watched in a much more detailed way than before. A single soldier moving at the wrong moment can be enough. A vehicle engine running too hot can be enough. An entrance to a shelter used one time too many can be enough. And when that level of observation becomes normal, even routine movement starts to look dangerous. That is where the pressure becomes far more serious than a simple drone threat. The old idea was that survival depended on avoiding large-scale exposure. Now the problem is much smaller and much harder to solve. A short run across a field, a stop beside a ruined building, or a quick move from one covered point to another can still be picked up from above. The source makes that clear by showing how widely different targets were struck in sequence. One man tried to cross a wide-open area and was found. A regular transport car was tracked and hit. Positions inside a hangar were not safe once the drone entered the space and searched the interior. Even troops coming out of a basement together became vulnerable in seconds. This is not only about accuracy. It is about how little exposure is now required before a target becomes visible and then attackable. That changes the basic math of survival near the front. The urban setting makes that pressure even more unsettling, because walls and ruins still look like cover to the people below, but they no longer guarantee real protection. A broken street, a damaged courtyard, or a half-collapsed structure can hide a person from ground fire, yet it does much less against a drone that is already above the area. If the roof is open, if the line of movement is predictable, or if the entry point is known, the hiding place starts losing value. Both normal cameras and thermal systems can keep working through darkness and confusion, so the target does not need to stand in the open for long. That is why the city is becoming a trap as much as a shield. And once a hiding place becomes only temporary instead of secure, every short pause under pressure begins to carry new risk. The same logic applies after dark, and that may be the most important shift of all. Night used to give soldiers a narrow but real chance to move, resupply, or wait out the danger. That window is getting smaller. Thermal optics often work better in darkness, and a moving body or warm engine can stand out even more clearly when the background cools down. So the idea of waiting for night, then making a quick dash through a gap, is no longer as reliable as it once was. What we are seeing instead is a battlefield where exposure is measured in moments, not minutes. When even small, isolated, and widely separated targets can be found and hit, combat starts to move away from direct clashes and toward continuous hunting. And once that hunting logic settles in, the roads and supply lines behind those scattered positions come under even greater pressure. Around Pokrovsk, the most dangerous pressure is no longer only falling on the men holding the line, because the roads behind them are being hunted as hard as the trenches in front. That matters because supply routes are the bloodstream of any active front. When transport vehicles are destroyed, the loss does not end with one burned frame on a road. It spreads outward into missing ammunition, delayed food, fewer spare parts, and reinforcements that arrive too late to matter. That is why these strikes carry more weight than they may seem at first glance.
Drones.
A hit on a truck or bike may
managed
look
to shoot
small
down
compared
one of
with
them.
the destruction of a tank, but in practice it can weaken an entire position over time. If enough vehicles disappear, the front line begins to feel the shortage before commanders can fully respond. That is where Pokrovsk becomes more than a map point, because it shows how drone warfare can choke a battle without needing a dramatic breakthrough. The source makes that pattern clear by treating transport itself as a high-value target. Motorcycles carrying supplies, ordinary vehicles used for logistics, and other support platforms are all being hunted with intent. This reflects a larger military logic. An army can survive local losses in manpower or armor for a time, but it cannot function for long if the flow of material starts breaking apart. Every road movement becomes a gamble. Every delivery run risks turning into a visible heat source on an exposed route. And once crews know they are being watched, movement slows, hesitation grows, and the whole support cycle becomes less efficient even before the next strike lands. That is how pressure on logistics begins to reshape the fight far beyond the place of impact. At the same time, the Russian side is clearly trying to adapt rather than simply absorb the damage. Some vehicles are now being fitted with metal cages, or protective frames often described as Mongol-style armor, which is meant to interfere with FPV attack angles and reduce the chance of a clean hit. That detail is important because it shows the battlefield is no longer a simple story of cheap drones easily destroying expensive equipment every time. The defense side is learning, modifying, and experimenting under fire. Crews understand that the top and side of a vehicle are now danger zones in a way they were not before, so the machine itself is being reshaped around the drone threat. This is adaptation in real time, and it proves that both sides are locked in a fast technical contest rather than a static pattern of attack and loss. Even so, adaptation has not solved the problem. In one reported case, 6 FPV drones were used against a protected target, yet the vehicle was damaged rather than completely destroyed. That point deserves attention because it cuts against the idea that every drone strike ends in instant total loss. Sometimes the armor works just enough to keep the platform alive. Sometimes the hit angle is poor. Sometimes one strike opens the vehicle but does not finish it. But this does not reduce the larger danger. It actually highlights how the fight is changing. One side answers with more drones, better timing, and repeated attacks. The other responds with more shielding, more improvisation, and attempts to spread risk across routes and platforms. So the real contest is no longer only cost against cost. It is endurance against adaptation and tempo against recovery. In that contest, the side that can keep more eyes and strike drones in the air usually holds the deeper advantage. Even if Mongol-style protection can extend a vehicle's life, it cannot fully restore a road network that is under constant pressure. And once the transport chain is slowed for long enough, the front line starts weakening on its own, which is why the next layer under threat is not hard to identify. After hitting air defense, fuel, transport, and exposed troops, Ukrainian UAVs appear to be focusing on one more category that gets less attention on video, but can damage a whole sector far more than one burning vehicle. That category is communications and command support. An antenna may look small compared with a launcher or a truck, yet its role is much bigger than its shape suggests. It helps pass orders, connect units, support artillery coordination, and keep responses moving when the battlefield changes fast. So when a communication node is destroyed, the damage is not limited to one piece of equipment. The real effect is delay, confusion, and lost timing across the force that depends on it. And in a war where minutes can decide whether a unit escapes, fires back, or gets hit again, delay can be as dangerous as direct fire. That is why these strikes matter at the operational level, not just at the visual level. The source makes that logic especially clear by stressing that one antenna can support many units at the same time. That means one precise UAV strike can create a wider information gap than many people first assume. A commander may lose contact with a forward group. An artillery team may receive targeting data too late. A local formation may not know whether to hold, move, or pull back. Under pressure, even a short communications break can cause wrong movement, wasted ammunition, or silence at the moment when a fast answer is needed most. This is why destroying an antenna is not just breaking metal. It can make part of the front temporarily blind and deaf. And when several layers of the force are already under stress, that kind of blindness becomes far more costly than it looks from the outside. What makes this even more important is how it fits the wider pattern already seen across the battlefield. The strikes on Tor systems weakened local air defense. The hit on the fuel depot threatened sustainment. The destruction of the ground robot showed that even new unmanned tools are vulnerable. The attacks on transport around Pokrovsk put pressure on supply flow. The targeting of troops, shelters, and small moving assets narrowed the space where Russian forces could hide or reposition. Now the focus on antennas and command support adds another effect, because it strikes the links that help the whole structure function as one system. Taken together, this no longer looks like a collection of separate battlefield clips. It looks like a layered campaign designed to reduce the ability of Russian forces to see, move, supply, and coordinate at the same time. That is the core point of the whole picture. These drones are not being used only to chase targets of opportunity or produce dramatic footage. They are filling several roles inside one combat process. They search, track, strike, return, and confirm damage. That full cycle matters because battle damage assessment turns each hit into usable knowledge, and usable knowledge helps shape the next hit. So every destroyed target does more than remove one asset. It also weakens the reaction speed of the network around it. One gap in air defense opens room above. One fuel loss cuts endurance behind. One broken road slows relief. One dead antenna disrupts decisions across the line. That is how small strikes start producing larger battlefield effects. For that reason, the most important thing to watch is not simply how many more vehicles, positions, or systems get hit in the days ahead. The deeper question is how far this chain can go in turning a heavily manned front into one that is short on fuel, short on coordination, short on concealment, and short on time to recover. And once a battlefield begins losing all of those at once, the pressure no longer stays on one target because it starts bearing down on the whole fighting structure. Taken as a whole, the UAV strikes around Lyman, Donetsk, Luhansk, and Pokrovsk show that the battlefield is changing in a very clear way. The advantage no longer belongs only to the side with more troops, more armor, or more fortified positions. It is shifting toward the side that can detect faster, strike sooner, and keep pressure on the enemy without giving him time to recover. Thermal cloaks, Mongol-style protection, night movement, and basement cover all show that Russian forces are trying to adapt. But the wider pattern points to something more serious. Ukraine is not just destroying single targets. It is putting pressure on the whole combat structure, from air defense and fuel to transport and communications. If that trend continues, the key question will not only be who holds more ground. It will be who can keep command, supply, and battlefield coordination alive long enough to survive this kind of constant pressure from above. Subscribe to Military Force for more deep battlefield analysis, clear updates, and the real story behind the war.